Well, thank you. I hope I don't disappoint. So I'm going to tell a story which I shouldn't tell. So I was on call last night, so I think I've had like 2 hours of sleep. But before I took call yesterday, I ironed my brand new suit, ironed my shirt. About an hour ago, I was changing into it, and I go, these pants don't fit very well, but I'll just cinch it up with my belt. Couldn't find my belt. I left my belt at home. So now you got me in scrubs, so I'm sorry I didn't dress up for the occasion. I'm going to move us back in time, probably about 500 years ago, then a little bit over 100 years ago, and then about 60 years ago. And the evolution of the Sagittectomy is the title of this. I'm not going to tell you what a Sagittectomy is. I'll let you think about that, and we'll talk about it near the end, but you don't really need to know what Sagittectomy is to hear the talk. So my objectives are really to weave together the exploits of Cabeza de Vaca, the origin of the Texas Surgical Society, and then Tom Lea's artistic contribution to the Texas surgical history and medical history in this great state. So let's go back in time. Cabeza de Vaca. I'm not going to give this whole name. We'll just do the last part. Cabeza de Vaca. Do you know what Cabeza de Vaca stands for? Cabeza? What kind of head? Cow head. So he got this name from his mother's ancestors, who was a shepherd, a lowly shepherd, about 150 years before he was born. There was a battle between the Moors and Spain. And the shepherd got a cow's head, he put it in a pass, and that showed the Spanish troops where to go, and they won the battle. So the king at that time bestowed that name, Cabeza, to his ancestor. And Cabeza de Vaca was supposed to be very, very proud of using that name. Cool name, I think. Okay, we're going to talk about the adventure of Cabeza de Vaca, his about 8-year adventure to Texas and those areas back then. So he was a conquistador. He was under another conquistador named Nunez, who actually was a one-eyed conquistador who supposedly wasn't very nice and wasn't very competent either. But he was part of this expedition, multiple ships, 600 men. They left Spain in 1527. They were supposed to go to the Gulf of Mexico and colonize and conquer that part, including what we now call Texas and part of Mexico. 600 men, they went across the Atlantic. Some of them, they first stopped in Cuba. A lot of them said, I don't need this. They broke away from the group. And then a hurricane pushed them into the northern part of Florida, near Tampa Bay, we think. Several of the men died. Some of them decided they're going to trek across because they had no idea what the distance was from where they were to where they were trying to get in present-day Mexico. Multiple men died, but the rest of them got in 5 barges that they constructed, and they went across the Gulf of Mexico. Many of them died over that voyage from Florida to the Texas coast. They finally landed on the Isle of Mahaldo. Does everybody know where Mahaldo is in Texas? Good. Well, first of all, Mahaldo means Island of Doom. That's not a good name. Galveston, okay? They debate, was it on the north part, was it on the St. Bolivar Island, which part, but I have no idea, but somewhere in Galveston. There was only 247 men left at that time. And the Native Americans at the time, and they believe the tribe was called the Karankawa. They took them in. They were sort of like captives, but they took care of them. But over time, the men died because of disease, things of that nature. The Native Americans made some of these men, quote, medicine men, because they said, these guys look a lot different than us. We think they have great powers, so they made them medicine men. This shows the tribes. There was like basically 5 subtypes of the Karankawas. And you can see Galveston. I can't see it from here, in that area. So that's where they landed somewhere. During that time, they were held captive for about 2 or 3 years, and many of the men were dying over time with various reasons. But then they started trekking across the state, and they were meeting various Native American tribes during their trek across the state, and most of them died very quickly. Pretty much when they got to the central part of what we would say Texas is now, there was only 4 men left, Cabeza de Vaca and 3 other men. They were still captives. And they slowly moved across, and they talked about how the Native Americans wanted them to cure them of their ills. And they actually were very successful. For whatever reasons, they were successful. And this is in his autobiography. They wanted to make us physicians by examining us or inquiring about our diplomas. The Native Americans actually cured by blowing upon the sick with smoke and stuff. And with that breath and the opposing hands, they cast out infirmity. They also told us to do the same and be free of using it in that same way. We laughed at what they did. We mocked them, said, this is crazy, this is not medicine. We told them it was folly, that we don't know how to heal. We're not physicians, we're conquistadors. In consequence, the Native Americans withheld food from them. At last, finding ourselves in great want, we were constrained to obey them. So now they became medicine men because they had no choice. The way we treated the sick was to make over them the sign of the cross while blowing on them, recite the Lord's Prayer, and do Hail Marys, and pray to God our Lord as best we could to give them good health and inspire them to do us some favors. Thanks to God's will and the mercy He had upon us, all those for whom we prayed, as soon as we crossed them, meaning the sign of the cross, told others that they were cured and they felt well again. This is actually very well documented that they were actually, quote, curing these Native Americans. So we're still going through the adventure across what we would say Texas is. All of the Spaniards died. I already told you that. There's only 4 of them left. They actually had a following of about 3,000 to 4,000 Native Americans that were going across the state with them, sort of like, I guess, Taylor Swifties. They were following him because they were the rock stars back then for these Native Americans. They were held in very high esteem. And there's where we're going to start talking about the first documented surgery in North America. We believe, or not me, but the people that have done the research think it occurred somewhere in West Texas, probably around Pecos, Texas. A couple of people said it actually occurred in New Mexico. So a native Texan like me, we're not going to believe that. It occurred in West Texas. Some of the researchers actually thought it occurred in Galveston area, but we know it didn't occur there. It was somewhere in West Texas. Because you could tell how they were coming across. You can hear about the various change in the climate or the plants and stuff. So this is the picture that Tom Lea drew showing Cabeza de Vaca, who's bending over the Indian, taking out the arrowhead. So what it was a high-ranking older Indian who was injured by an arrow that went through his right shoulder, and it wedged near his sternum, like right here. And it was a festering wound, so pus was coming out. The guy was malnourished, according to the reports, because he was infected chronically, just like we see nowadays with chronic wounds, not healing well, just doing poorly. So they brought him to Cabeza de Vaca, and he went there. He used a knife. We think it was probably like either flint or obsidian, because all his stuff was lost on the barge when they crashed in Galveston. So he probably got it from the Native Americans, and he pulled out the arrowhead. So I'm going to read his operative note. So when we do surgery, we have to do an op note. So here's this quote. Here they brought me a man and said that a long time ago he had been wounded with an arrow through the right shoulder, and the arrowhead was lodged near the heart. He said it gave him much pain, and for that reason he was always sick. I touched him and felt the arrowhead, meaning right here, and saw that it traversed the cartilage, which means right by what we would say by the sternum. With my knife, I opened his chest to that spot and saw that the point of the arrow was crosswise and was difficult to remove. I continued to cut the tissue near the arrowhead. I inserted the point of my knife, and with great difficulty, I finally was able to extract it. The arrowhead was very long. I then used a deer bone, using my knowledge of surgery, which I have no idea how much knowledge of surgery he had. I took 2 stitches, following which he bled profusely all over me. We think that the bleeding that he so profusely was at the internal memory artery. And that's actually the artery the cardiac surgeons use to revascularize the heart nowadays. When I removed the arrowhead, I gave it to them. The entire village came over to see it, and they sent it back to the back country so that those who were there could also view it. Because of this operation, they had many dances and festivities, as was their custom. Then on a couple days later, I cut it. So this is now his post-op care, like they come to our clinic nowadays. On another day, I cut the Indian's 2 stitches, and he was well. He was very proud of himself. The wound I had made was no more apparent than the crease in the palm of my hand. So I mean, he had a beautiful surgical scar. He said he felt neither pain nor any discomfort, and the cure he gave us among them and throughout the land, we could now control all the Native Americans. He didn't call them Native Americans, and that they considered us to be very valuable and cherished men. So once again, these 4 men were rock stars, especially Cabeza de Vaca. So now they were somewhere in West Texas. They had the Indians following them. Oh, this is his signature, just like a typical surgeon. It's very difficult to read. So epilogue. So they were moving West Texas. Probably now they were into northern New Mexico. They encountered some Spaniards in northern New Mexico near the Gulf of California. So these guys went a long way. I mean, just remember, Galveston to El Paso is about 750 miles, maybe more or less. They were actually even further west, most likely, in the Gulf of Mexico area. They met these Spaniards who, unfortunately, were trying to capture slaves to conquer them and bring them down to southern Mexico. They escorted these 4 men to Mexico City. They stayed there for a while, and then they left in 1537 back to Spain. He was in here for 8 years, traversing across our state. Well, you would think he would stay there, write his stories and stuff, but no, he decided to go back to the New World in 1541, 4 years later. He became the governor of what we would call Paraguay now, in South America. Like politics nowadays, he got in trouble. Some people that were high up in the political spectrum considered him to be treasonous. They put him in prison or in chains. He was brought back across the Atlantic to Spain. He was a prisoner to 1545, and he died actually in poverty in 1557. All this stuff he did, and he was now blacklisted and in poverty. This map, and I can't remember who did this map, I think in the 1960s or so, or 1950s, shows some of the various routes that they believe that he and his team, or all these conquistadors, did. You can see Cuba down there. They went to the northern part of Florida, and they just traversed really the Gulf. They try to hug the shoreline, and they landed in Galveston. There's been many people that have done doctoral dissertations saying this is how Cabeza de Vaca and his people trekked across the state. Nobody really knows exactly. But based on his description of the flora and the fauna, this is about as close as they can get. But he talks about, when he was in the central part, going into the western part of the state, about the prickly pear. They call it the tuna. That's what the Native Americans really would eat in the springtime. I always thought the Native Americans always, they were very prosperous. They could kill all these animals. They had plants. When you read his accounting of it, they were almost always starving. So they had, disease and stuff, and they just didn't have enough food. But they would always, in the spring, when the prickly pear would have those little tunas that we always see, very pretty, before they bloom, that's what they would live off of. So that's probably one of these routes that he took, and eventually into Mexico. This is a great book, Relacíon. It's called The Accounting, The Telling. You can find this on the internet. It's free. I was able to Google it a few times. It's his story about his time in the New World. And it really will talk about the plants, the animals, all the various tribes that he encountered, how they were all unique, and just his story. It's a great read. That's a good read for a winter when you have anything to do when it's too cold outside. So please take a look at that. He wrote that in 1542 back in Spain. Okay, now we're going to shift gears a little bit. We're going to talk about the Texas Surgical Society. And we just had our meeting last weekend in Fort Worth. So take a look at this picture here. Tom Lea actually drew this, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. You see the arrowhead, or the arrow? Look, what do you see on the shaft of the arrow? It may be hard to see from where you are. It's broken because the arrow was broken, right? The shaft was broken. That was embedded in the Native American. You got the cabeza of the cow, and then you see the star of Texas. It's beautiful artwork, I think. So we're going to talk about the Texas Surgical Society. The Texas Medical Association was put together like in the 1890s or so, but and they meet on a regular basis. Actually, my wife was just out of the TMA meeting, and now she's at the AMA meeting in Washington, D.C., so that's why she's not here. But some of the physicians that were surgeons, and back then the surgeons did more than that. They would deliver babies, they would do all kinds of stuff, and vice versa. They said, we need to have our own surgical society. And you need to realize around that time, surgical societies were being formed. The American College of Surgeons came about just a couple of years before that. The Western Surgical Association was. The Texas surgeons said, we need to get together and make our own society. That was in 1914. They put together, like we always do, you get a subgroup of people, a task force or a work group to say, you guys do all the work and come back to our bigger group and tell us how to do this. So they actually were working fairly fast. In November that year, remember it was in May, and then in November they got together. They put together their constitution, it was adopted, and they said, we're going to limit this only to surgeons that just practice surgery. So people delivering babies aren't going to be part of this. People that are just doing urology are not going to be part of this. Just surgeons. There was 21 surgeons that were in the charter group. And they had 4 requirements. It was all men. What's his moral standing in the community? What's his ethical standing in the community? Some are similar there. Is he regarded among members of the profession as a fee splitter? Now, a fee splitter is sort of like a kickback. Like, okay, Dr. Hanna's a pediatrician. He's going to send me a kid, and I'm going to say, I'm going to take out the appendix or whatever. I'm going to give him some money. So that was considered highly inappropriate. In the American Medical Association, Texas Medical Association still has a big stance against that. But they did limit it to just people doing only surgery. So they had their first meeting in Houston at the Rice Hotel, a very old hotel. Dr. Thompson from Galveston, the founding chair of UTMB, Department of Surgery, the first and oldest medical school in Texas, is actually the first medical school west of the Mississippi. They had their 21 members, they met, and what they would do, they would meet and they would give presentations, like talk about how they took care of somebody with this disease, this surgical disease, whatever, so they could all learn from each other. And we still do that today. We meet every 6 months somewhere. And in 2026, we'll be meeting again in El Paso. The last time we met here was in, I think, 2014. So it's really neat. And we got about 300 surgeons that attend, and the various types of surgeons all over the state. Really nice time to socialize. And I actually gave a presentation just last Saturday. I talked about the assassination of Lee Harvey Oswald. We all want to talk about JFK, which is, I think it's very fascinating too, but I talked about the surgeons that took care of Oswald on that Sunday. And it's actually 60 years ago. It's amazing how time flies. So this is Dr. Thompson, the founding chair of surgery of Galveston. So here's some timelines that are important in the history of the Texas Surgical Society. And the reason I put 1965 in red, that's where Tom Lea came into the story. So we're going to now talk about Tom Lea. And it actually was not in 1965. It was probably around late 1963, early 1964, that some of the surgeons that's a picture of Tom Lea and the picture of Sarah. It actually wasn't Tom Lea first. It was a gentleman named Gene Carl Herzog. And his claim to fame is he put together the Texas Western printing press. He then became a faculty member at UTEP, and he and Tom Lea really worked together on a lot of projects. You can see this picture here, that's a Tom Lea painting. But Carl Herzog was a printer, put together books, typesetter. He got connected with the Texas Surgical Society to put together a book. and because they wanted to do the first 50-year history of the Texas Surgical Society. And I'll pass this around. Anytime you become a member of the Texas Surgical Society, they give you this book. And now there's actually 3 different editions. That's
Paintings in it, right?
There's some paintings in there.
Well,
Not really paintings, but yes. So they met with Mr. Herzog, Dr. Sparkman did, and he says, I got this artist here in El Paso that's a good friend of mine. He can do some painting for you for this book and make for these insignias that you need for your society. And at that point, they started talking. They got Mr. Tom Lea involved, and Mr. Herzog, Dr. Sparkman, and we'll show a picture of him later, and Tom Lea got together, and they said, we want to commission you to do this painting for us. Initially, I think it was going to be $1,000. And Tom Lea supposedly got so excited about that because he was hearing about Cabeza de Vaca, how he is the patron saint or the patron surgeon of the Texas Surgical Society. That's why you see the cow head. Typical surgeons, cow head, sort of bullheaded. So we use that as our insignia, and they got him to do the picture. So going back, 1946, there's a Lea-Herzog collaboration, The 12 Travelers Through the Past. Who do you think that picture is right there? 1946. You can't answer. That's Cabeza de Vaca leading those other men across Texas. So Tom Lea actually did that in 1946 and worked with Herzog on the book. This is Lea and Herzog in 1967. Tom Lea is on the left. And they're both older. Well, Herzog was older than him. Nice picture of the two. So now I'm going to pull in Dr. Sparkman. And he's the one that connected with Herzog. Herzog connected him with Tom Lea. Dr. Sparkman was the chair of surgery at the Baylor Medical School in Dallas, not the one in Houston, but in Dallas for many, many years. He was the president of the Texas Surgical Society in 1963, and he was part of the work group that says we need a painting to commemorate our 50th anniversary, and that's how he and Herzog and Tom Lea got together. So I think this is really fascinating. Adair talked about he did the painting in our backyard. He really did. So Herzog, Sparkman, and Lea actually went to White Sands. And that's where Tom started working on the earlier drawings and stuff. They brought in some teenagers over there. They were the background for the Native Americans. And doing some research, I went to the Carl Herzog collection, which is at UTEP. Herzog is the guy that's the Indian. It's not like he actually had emphysema, so he sort of looked a little like he was chronically ill. The gentleman bending over, that's Cabeza de Vaca, that's actually Dr. Sparkman. As you said earlier, he actually would really just research his work, not just say, okay, I'm going to throw some pictures together, some drawings together. He met with Dr. Sparkman and says, okay, how would you take out an arrowhead? Not that anybody takes out an arrowhead nowadays, but Sparkman would say, this is how I would take out with my scalpel and stuff. So they worked on that together, and they went to White Sands and did that. So the reason I can tell you this for real, that I know it's Sparkman that was the Cabeza de Vaca. I have this painting or drawing here, and Tom Lea has a writing on there. This is a working drawing of Alvar Cabeza de Vaca. It's from my friend Bob Sparkman, who himself showed me by posing for the hands of this figure how he called him Alvar Nunez, this Cabeza de Vaca, must have performed the surgical work of removing the arrowhead from the sick Indian's chest in the year 1535. I give him thanks with my regards. So that's showing Sparkman bending over. So Herzog and Sparkman were very, very close friends over the years. They have this is obviously before internet, before emails, they had 250 letters of correspondence between them. And they talk about reminiscing when Herzog writes to Sparkman, says, remember when Tom Lea, our friend, got us out to White Sands? We did that. You had this tobacco chewing guy being the Indian and you were the Cabeza de Vaca. So that's how that picture came to being. Very realistic. This shows the book, and actually there's a cover for the book, so I took the cover out. It was a little hard to pull out. So Tom Lea did this work for that, and with Herzog, because Herzog was in charge of the Texas Western Printing Press at the time. This is more pictures. You see the shaft. I love this picture. We have this. I was going to wear my tie. Actually, I have a Tom Lea tie. Actually, it's a Texas surgical tie, which has that insignia, but I couldn't wear my shirt today. I forgot that, but I did bring it. I tried. I made the effort. So, Sagittectomy. Has anybody heard the word Sagittectomy? It's a made-up word, actually. I didn't make it up. There's a Jesse Thompson, who was the chair of surgery after Sparkman passed away. He became chair of surgery at Baylor. He put together this article in the New England Journal of Medicine, a very prestigious medical journal, in 1973, where he talked about Cabeza de Vaca, how he did his thing across Texas. A lot of surgeons have written about this guy, and we're all Texas Surgical Society members, which he was too. He was also president of Texas Surgical Society at one point, and he talks about him going across and how he believes that Cabeza de Vaca did the surgery on the Native American. And so he actually combined two words, sagitta, probably saying it wrong. It's a Latin phrase for arrow or arrowhead. It's actually a constellation. Go Google it. It's a constellation that actually sort of looks like an arrow with 3 stars. Ectomia means to cut out, another Latin phrase. So think of appendectomy, cut out appendix. Cholecystectomy, take out gallbladder. Sagittectomy, take out arrowhead. So he actually made up this phrase. I've looked it up. There's nowhere else I've seen on the internet that Sagittectomy exists other than Dr. Thompson, who was a very well-known surgeon back in the 70s and 80s and 90s, early 90s, wrote that. I thought that was pretty cool. So I know it's getting late. I'm going to leave you with a quote, which I love this quote. This is the cenotaph at the Texas State Cemetery in Austin. Tom Lea is not buried there, but that's his cenotaph. This quote was given by George W. Bush when he accepted the nomination at the Republican convention, I think in, what was it, 2020, I guess, yes. So this is really good. This is very inspiring. Sarah and I live on the east side of our mountain, the Franklin Mountains, of course. It is the sunrise side, not the sunset side. It is the side to see the day that is coming, not the side to see the day that is gone. The best day is the day coming with the work to do, with the eyes wide open, with grateful heart. I love that phrase. When I get in a bad mood, I think of that. And obviously, George Bush did too for his Republican nomination. So I'm going to stop here because I know it's getting late. We have another, Holly's going to come talk. I want to thank you. Hopefully it wasn't too boring. Thank you.